And on 5 Live Sports Extra, all the qualification, all the practices, you can hear all of it as we build up to that fantastic race on Sunday afternoon. And we'll be talking about that race, the two Brits, of course, 1 and 2, and the classification as they build up to it on 11:30, so in about 12 minutes' time here on 5 Live. We're going to talk about UK house prices right now. They've been wilting a little this summer, possibly due to the heat. The Halifax Building Society, no less, says that property prices fell for the third month in a row this month. They say that the average cost of a home dropped by 0.6% during June. Loads of conflicting surveys have been published recently. 5 Live's Jenny Culshaw is here with some content, and you have 1 minute to tell us about the content. Off you go.
Thank you, Ian. So Halifax, as you say, says property prices across the UK are going down. But only last week, Nationwide said house prices rose by 0.1% in June. Now, the two normally come up with similar figures, but because each uses just their own mortgage customers for reference, they're looking at different houses, so they can be different. Now, Home Track agrees with Nationwide and says property prices went up by 0.1% in June, but they use a very different method. They asked 3,500 estate agents across all the postcodes of England and Wales whether asking prices were rising or falling. Now, this doesn't include Scotland or Northern Ireland, but would include cash sales, which Halifax and Nationwide don't.
30 seconds.
Rightmove also said prices were up in June by 0.3%, but they're only looking at asking prices from their own website. The government figures for June from the DCLG aren't due out till August. Now, what will be interesting to see is the Land Registry figures. They come out at the end of this month and they record all completed property sales.
15.
This, again, though, is just for England and Wales. Registers of Scotland do their own, as do Northern Ireland. So it's all quite different across the country and across the surveys.
Well done. Very good. Thank you.
Did you understand?
Yes.
Good.
Should I buy or rent?
Entirely up to you. It depends what your needs are. It shouldn't be about money. It should be what your needs are.
Very, very good answer. Congratulations. We'll speak to you later. That's Jenny Culshaw. We want to hear about the housing market in your area, because that's really what's, out in the field, as it were. That's the most important thing. One survey says the UK house prices have therefore fallen for the third month running. I think it was the Halifax said they've gone down, but the Nationwide, I think I read somewhere saying they've gone up. So, confused, you will be. So if you have to move, should you buy or should you rent? And we want to know your experiences. What have you discovered? Because that's the litmus test. What is the problem out there for you? Have you discovered that selling your house is an absolute disaster because no one wants to buy? There was one report I read the other day that said, the housing market's appalling at the moment because no women can get their men off the sofa because of the World Cup. That's the kind of crazy surveys that you get that 8 out of 10 cats would have a wonderful field day with at the moment. So call us 0500 909 693 or text us 85058, and Tom will obviously collate the best and read them out. Jonathan Davis is an economist and investment advisor. Good evening, Jonathan.
Hi, Ian.
Thanks for staying up. Robert Reid is sitting opposite me. He's a Cheshire estate agent.
Good evening.
You Cheshire cat? In smiling? As always.
I always smile.
Good lad.
Particularly when I'm debating with Jonathan. That's great.
Have you fought before? You two?
We have. It was a most enjoyable experience.
Excellent. Well, let's hope this one is too. Jonathan, as I say, you're an economist and investment advisor. What would you like to say on this subject?
I'd like to say that the media always tries to confuse by looking at surveys at a point in time, when in fact you should be looking at the trends and the economy. The trends are that transaction numbers, as Mr. Reid there, the estate agent, knows full well, is that the number of transactions are literally a half of what they were in the years leading up to the end of the bubble, which was 2007.
OK, stop there. Let me ask, is that true?
It's certainly less transactions now than there was before the peak. Yeah,
okay.
I agree.
Carry on, Jonathan.
And 500 estate agents have gone bust.
Hold on, is that true?
Where? Not I haven't gone bust. I don't know where he's talking about. Probably over the country, I would think that is true.
OK, carry on.
And of the estate agents that are still around, 40% of the people there have been made redundant.
Is that true?
Not in my company. May well be true in others.
OK, carry on.
It is true. I wouldn't be stating facts otherwise. Lending is still restricted because the banks are technically not solvent. When you consider all the bad loans that they have on their books in commercial and residential property, that's the reason why people are finding it difficult to get loans.
Are you predicting a crash?
Yes.
course he is.
A really bad one.
What do you call really bad?
Well, house prices just collapsing.
Yes, my firm is forecasting at least a 30% fall over the next 2, 3 or 4 years.
30%?
Well, I don't know why you're so surprised by that, because they fell
I'm worried
25%.
about my house.
Let me finish. They fell 25% from September 07 to April 09, and they've come up about 10 or 15% on average since then. So yes, another 30% from this point, which would mean about 40 to 50% off from the highs in September 07.
Why do you think this is going to happen?
Well, that's what I'm trying to say to you, but you keep asking an estate agent whether or not I'm telling the truth. First, volumes are collapsed. Secondly, lending has collapsed. Buy-to-let is down 80% from the highs. Sterling has risen against the euro, whereas when the euro was strong, they were saying that all the Europeans were buying in London. The budget is going to create 500,000 more unemployed, and supply is going through the roof according to estate agents. Put it all together, and it's obvious you have the recipe for the biggest house price crash in history.
Robert, calm my heart, because I'm getting scared.
Well, I mean, it's a classic case. I mean, the more he talks, the less he says. I mean, it's quite interesting. At the end of the day, there are massive variations in different regions, and there are variations throughout the country. My view is that the market at the moment is very steady, and I think all the surveys would reflect that, because actually 0.1%, 0.6%, are relatively minor figures. I mean, most of my vendors, if they got an offer of 0.6% below the asking price, would be delighted. So actually, I think that's not a major issue. I think when you get to points of concern is when it starts going up or going down in dramatic directions and dramatic amounts. So, for example, I don't think it's healthy for the market to go flying up by 20% in a year. Likewise, I don't think it's healthy for the market to be falling by that. And I think the appetite out there with the public is for prices probably to stay pretty steady, transaction levels, which is the really key thing. I mean, that's really important, because whether prices go up, down, sideways, whatever, how many people are actually moving house is a much more interesting question, because if prices all fall by 20%, and that's being reflected throughout the market, the transaction levels will stay pretty similar, and that's what brings in revenue in terms of stamp duty.
So, Robert, why are transaction levels 50% of the bubble years?
Well, I would just ask you the question, Jonathan. Why is it that I am selling 10 to 15 houses a month from Tarpley, which is in Cheshire, which is going absolutely fine, and that's a decent number. It's not a spectacular number.
Look, this is a national station.
I know it might upset you.
Why don't you talk about the nation? Why are transaction numbers 50% from the highs?
Well, that's fine. Why are prices going up in London?
Prices were going up in London. They're not going up in London any longer.
And what upon that are you basing? Because actually, if you actually speak to a lot of London agents, there's actually incredibly a shortage of stock in many areas of London.
Supply is going up in London, and prices are now falling in London, and the Europeans are no longer buying in London. But why are you focused on London? This is a national radio station.
Well, with respect, Jonathan, 2 minutes ago you were telling me off for talking about Cheshire, and I started talking about London. So I'd say respectfully, make up your mind, stick to the issues. So why are you picking on Cheshire, which has got
multi-million-pound properties, and the centre of London, when it's a national station?
I beg your pardon, I was talking about Cheshire. You then said widen it out. I talked about London. Now, if you want to come on here for a discussion about sort of personal abuse, that's your own choice. Let's talk about the issues, which is house prices.
I'm stating economic facts, which you are disputing.
Well, are you disputing that I'm selling 10 to 15 houses a month across the price range? And
who cares about what your estate agency is doing?
Well,
500 estate agencies have gone bust.
Well, with respect, Jonathan, you obviously care because you're extremely passionate, and I take that as a compliment, and I thank you for that. But if we actually look at the issue of house prices, if you look at my stock of sales at the moment, let me give you some facts about it. There's a variation between the smallest sale is about 125,000 and the biggest sale is 2.1 million, and there's everything in the mix, and there's no real correlation between what's going. There's a real spread of that. There's a spread of geography. And even if you look at where the buyers are coming from, 50% are coming from locally and 50% from outside the area. And I think the crucial thing with housing, which is different to, say, clothes or different to sort of many other economic things, is that there are emotional drivers to the housing market. So, for example, you're growing family, you need to buy a bigger house. Family moving away, you need to downsize. You lose your job, you need to sell. You get a promotion, you want to move up. And I think that is what perhaps is slightly different, whereas people can be quite economic about cutting out clothes. There is things which keep on.
Okay, well, we are asking people to call in because really it's about where you're living. As I say, it could be Cheshire, it could be London, it could be Liverpool, it could be Birmingham, Stockton, wherever you happen to live. Steve lives in Leeds. You've got a point to make, Steve. What would you like to say?
Yeah, good evening, panel.
Good evening.
The problem is house prices are too high. They will fall, not as dramatically as I can't remember the gentleman's name by another 30, 40%, but they will fall.
Jonathan Davis, yeah.
Jonathan, you've got to understand that what's the average income in the country? It's about 20, 25 grand, is it? Or somewhere about that?
Bit more, but yeah.
Yeah. What's the average house price? 170, is it?
I don't know. Let's ask an estate agent. Robert?
I think it's 164, but our economist, I'm sure Jonathan has an
Jonathan?
opinion.
What's the average house price in the UK?
The Halifax and Nationwide are very similar at about 160, 165,000.
Okay, yeah.
Jonathan, I agree.
Asking prices...
My God, they agree.
Can I just make the one point?
Yeah.
Asking prices are 240,000. So, you talk about, Robert, if someone gets an offer of 0.6% below the asking price. Well, you and I both know that is total balderdash, because according to Rightmove, which has the most properties for sale online in the country, asking price average is 240,000, but selling price is 165.
Robert, let me. It's a listener's show as well. Carry on, Steve.
Yeah, therefore you've got a multiplier of 8 times, which is still far too high. The banks are not lending money. My objection is that people have got to get the attitude and the belief is that a house is to live in, not to make a quick buck. Yep. This is the fundamental mistake we've made over the years. You cannot have people from wealthy areas buying houses in poor areas, thus depriving people from those areas of getting onto the property ladder. People want to own their own homes.
Do you think, Steve, that sometimes I wonder when I look at people? I'm not going to name names, but I sometimes. I mean, I work in sport and have worked in sport for a long time, and there are certain footballers. I know of one footballer. I think he owns 63 properties. Do you think there should be some sort of legislation about the number of properties you should own?
Without a shadow of a doubt, what do people, to whose benefit is it that people own loads and loads of houses to rent out? Who is benefiting? Who is benefiting?
You cannot legislate against people who want to get into business. I'm not the BBC, so I think I know what you're
wrong there. You're fundamentally wrong. So we're dealing with homes. We're not dealing with commercial property. We are dealing with residential property.
You're going to stop people getting into business.
Everybody, sorry?
You're going to stop people getting into business.
Well, it's different, isn't it?
I basically believe you've got to bring house prices down to a level where people can afford to buy homes. They will come down
because the economics make it so. They will come down. And those footballers who've got into buy-to-let in big time, they are going to lose fortunes. They have been sold pups left, right and centre.
Can I just ask a question in this? I mean, what the interesting thing is, I mean, the market might come down. I mean, unemployment is high and it's not good economic times. It is difficult, so house prices may well fall. I certainly can't rule that out. But I think relativity is a key concept to this, because I mean, this is why I do come back to this number of transaction things. It is the old scenario: you take 10%, fall, you pass on 10%, and the transactions keep on moving. I think that is more relevant actually, because whether prices fall by 40%, we get stuck into the statistical sort of mire where have they gone up, have they gone down. The question is, are people still moving? Can they afford to move? The only interesting, Jonathan, can I just finish this point half a second? The only thing which I think we would all agree, well, I would hope we would all agree, that we wouldn't want to see is more repossessions, which I think are a really
repossessions are going to go through the roof. Now that the election is over and the government-owned banks are no longer have Gordon Brown on them, repossessions, I'm afraid to say, are going to go through the stratosphere.
Jonathan, what would
it's inevitable.
Jonathan, what would your? I mean, I know you're kind of predicting Armageddon in the housing market. What would your advice be to people at the moment? Because you don't want to panic people. What's your advice?
I don't want to panic people. I want to tell people what's happening so that people don't make stupid financial decisions. And you say, as a media guy, I hear this all the time, you're preaching Armageddon. Actually, there's millions of people out there who would love to buy property right now, but they can't.
No, I'm asking you, what's your advice?
And sellers of properties are marketing properties at stupid prices.
Well, I'm
saying that prices are going to fall 30%.
Well,
obviously, don't buy.
Can I give some advice?
Right.
In general terms, save, I think, is a great thing to do, because I think increasingly, and it's not a bad thing, the deposits, and equity in mortgage products is becoming an increasingly important factor, and I think that will be a generational thing for years to come, and quite rightly so. So I think a practical suggestion is to save as much as possible, because that will be coming very handy when you do want to buy.
Yeah,
Jonathan,
because you haven't got any option, because the banks require you to put down something like 25 or 30%. There are 10% deposits, but only for very high interest rates, and really not that much money is available for that kind of lending.
And this is where I think there's some interesting debates about lower down the market for the first-time buyers, because I think if you take the person buying a house at, say, £500,000-600,000, they've probably got that 20% deposit which you need. So the interesting thing is, if you are, for example, a young graduate, you come out difficult jobs markets, you do well to get a job at all, and if you do, it's not tremendously well paid. You know, you've probably got a debt from university, and you want to buy a house with a 20% deposit, and let's say the average house, first-time buyer's house is 100,000, say, £20,000 is a lot of money to find, and that is where you need creative thinking about how you get onto the ladder, and that's why I think we're seeing more shared ownership schemes and things like this. Maybe people starting to buy together and things like that.
Ian, Robert again is being disingenuous. Robert's trying to pretend that for the last few years, up until the first stage in the crash, that first-time buyers were buying like Billy-O. Robert knows full well that in 2005,
Robert does not need Jonathan.
First-time properties were purchased by buy-to-letters. The buy-to-letters are no longer there, and the first-time buyers, as he already said, have got no money. Therefore, the chains are not going to complete.
Well, the only thing I would say in this situation is, I think when you look at a debate and you look at a conversation, you have to say, what has Jonathan today mentioned, which is either positive, constructive or practical.
Yes,
I think there's been very little.
Don't take yourself out a massive mortgage.
Jonathan's
that
message
is massively positive.
Jonathan's message is, I don't want to panic people, but we're all doomed. I think there's a better way forward.
Did you not see the budget 2 weeks ago?
I see, Jonathan.
I think we're going to have to leave
transaction levels.
I think we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your advice. If you've got a point to make, do text us 85058, or if you want to, you can phone us on that or any other subject you've heard.